Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Bulletproof Selling. My name is Sean Rhodes. I'm the Chief Sales Sergeant here at Bulletproof Selling and author of the book Bulletproof Selling, a guide for systemizing sales on the battlefield of business. Now, here at Bulletproof Selling, above all else, we believe that hope is not a sales strategy. I found that out the hard way when I began my career in sales. And as we talk to more and more salespeople around the world, we see that so many of them are relying on hope when there are better options available. Now, in this series, we get to interview some people that are out there in the world creating better options than hope for the people that are out there selling. And over the last couple of years that we've been running this show, we've been able to interview Hall of Fame speakers, best-selling authors, people that have coached and consulted with heads of state, heads of nations. So any aspect of the sales cycle that you're thinking that you may be relying on hope a little more than you should, we probably have an episode that has addressed it. So we'll definitely give you access to all of those archives at the end of the show. But my commitment to you is that each one of these shows will be tactically useful to you. One of my roles in my career path was to save lives on the battlefield by studying best practices of men and women out there kicking down doors, blowing stuff up, actually conducting combat missions, and realizing that they didn't have to rely on hope, and that made them perform at a level that allowed them to come home. Now, your life may not be on the line when you're out there making sales calls, but one thing that is your business. It's your livelihood. It's your career. And so each one of these episodes allows us with our guests to create a sales system that you can take out and use no matter the size of your team or the size of your goals. So as I get to be out there talking with people, one of the key elements when we get beyond relationships, we get beyond scripts, we get beyond checklists, is just how do you actually get out there and drive conversation? How do I locate the people that need what I have to sell? How do I research them well enough to be able to have an intelligent conversation when I do? And then when I get into that conversation, how do I come off in a way that doesn't make me sound like I'm attempting to waste their time? Because if you've ever started off in the early side of sales and you didn't receive very good training, you know a lot of your conversations were spent just getting hung up on, getting cold-shouldered, getting just no's over and over again, until you figured out, hey, I need to approach this differently. I need to actually show up in a way that allows our prospects to understand I'm here with value. My time is valuable as well. And my attempt on this call is to ascertain, are you the right type of person that I can provide this value to, or should we get off the phone and save ourselves both a lot of time? So as I've been out there working with organizations, a lot of partner companies that are out there also helping to facilitate salespeople's success, one of those that I've gotten to interview a few people from now is an organization called ConnectAndSell. Now, they're not an affiliate of mine. I don't get paid to bring them on the show, but we connect with salespeople that have brilliant things to share. And so many of them are working for ConnectAndSell. And so when we think about the organizations that are out there helping salespeople facilitate better conversations, this is definitely an organization to keep on your radar. And so when I'm approached by anybody working for a company like that that's leading a team, I know I'm going to have something to learn, and therefore I know they're going to be a very good conversation to have on the show. So without further ado, all the way from the United Kingdom today, I would love to welcome a member of ConnectAndSell leading a team for the UK, Mr. Gerry Hill. Gerry, welcome to Bulletproof Selling.
Thanks, Sean. Awesome to be here. And what a wonderful body of work to follow. What a wonderful body of work to follow, for sure.
Well, wonderful. So, love to find out about your sales career. So many people just find themselves by hook and by crook in weird ways in this career field of sales. So walk us through how you got started, how you ended up at ConnectAndSell, and what you get to do today to help salespeople.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I'm a hook or by crook kind of guy. I definitely ended up on the minefield post-college. You know, I probably had a bit more fun at college or university as I should have done. So wasn't setting myself up for one of those stellar banking or think tank type careers or hedge funds. So needed to make a living. My parents didn't want to support me anymore at 24 years old. So I ended up in staffing, which is and often an area that people stumble into. I worked for a few years at a major US global business called Robert Half. I did well, but I didn't know much about the world. And I come from an area in the UK that I guess would be equivalent to Silicon Valley in the sense that it was where all the big technology companies like Dell and Oracle and ServiceNow and everyone else had offices. And I saw guys that I went to high school with who didn't go to college, who weren't particularly smart, with awesome jobs in technology. And I kind of was like, right, how do I get some of this? And that was really the point for me. It still took me a bit of time to get into software. I worked for an amazingly a complex but brilliant organization called Frost and Sullivan for about 6 years. And that gave me some insights into research and consultancy and business planning and growth, and was very much at the tipping point of about $100 million worth of growth for customers over that 6 years. So exposed to some really smart minds. And then I jumped across into software after that, mainly pre-Series B sort of scale-up type organizations where I built and led teams. How did I come into ConnectAndSell? I was a customer. I found a problem that my team legitimately had, which was they were quite good at phone-based prospecting, but they just didn't want to do it. Too many voicemails, too many gatekeepers, too many switchboards. And, I Googled on the problem set, and Chris Beale, who's been on this illustrious podcast before, I know you guys have met, he cold called me on a Saturday morning after I'd sort of filled in an inbound lead form. And 3.5 hours later, I was hooked by the man, the idea, the value, and was a customer for a few years. And he said, "Listen, I'm setting up Europe. Do you want to come along?" And I was like, "Yeah, let's do it." So that's how we got to where I am today.
I love it. And the idea of call avoidance, something that we all deal with as salespeople. I know folks that have been selling for 20 and 30 years, and sometimes they get up and they don't want to make a phone call. They'd rather do anything. And most of them find things to do, right? We'll go play golf. We'll mess around on the internet. There's 1,000 different things to procrastinate our time with rather than picking up the phone. So one way that I've seen people get around that is to set, of course, activity goals. And a lot of sales leaders use that as a way to kind of carry it in the stick, a salesperson into making their calls. But where do you see salespeople relying on hope more than they should in having the right people to talk to, making sure that they are making enough calls to fill their pipeline? Because we know that this is the leading indicator of success in sales. How many conversations can I generate? If I'm not picking up the phone, I'm not generating conversation. So I'd love to know where you see salespeople relying on hope in this area.
It's funny, hope's a magnet. I think about hope being a magnet, and we hope that things just happen for us. Like little bits of metal, they just get drawn to us. Well, we hope in a lot of instances that just through the sheer brilliance of our charisma, the company's size and the problem set, stuff's just going to come to me, but it's not. And, I think proactivity is an element of sales DNA that's missing right now. Why? Because there's just so much automation. There's so much bad automation that sits between, a prospect, a seller, and the conversation. But it gives people this self-awareness issue, which is they think that because they pressed the button, they actually delivered a lot of work and a lot of value. They haven't. They created one thing once and set it out into the ether, and some of it sort of hopefully will stick. Now, it's not really their fault, because I don't think they're set up for success particularly well. They're not taught how to craft a great email. They're not taught how to craft a compelling top of funnel conversation. They're not necessarily taught how to be proactive and execute with rigor and persistence in follow-up. When automation comes along, it takes away a lot of the discipline components of executing a sustainable sales career. And, that's kind of the situation that we're in right now. It's easy to justify layoffs when sellers don't actually particularly drive a huge amount of value. It's easy to justify layoffs when sellers are ultimately overhired and over-indexed on badly thought out coverage models. The sellers that survive, they're the people that have shown a degree of proactivity, have shown that they've got the leading indicators into the lagging indicator, which is revenue, sustainably over and over and over and over again. I might be in a slump right now, but I know that if I proactively prospect my way out of that slump, I'll typically get the outcomes that I need in the future. So these are things that we commonly hear, regardless of macroeconomics, by the way. The things that we commonly see. I've seen them in teams that I've built. I still see them in some of the components of our business right now. It's the human psychology of it. It's like, I don't want to have a conversation. I'm a stranger. What am I going to say to this person? So there's all of these different components that drive core reluctance. But when it comes to hope, it's generally this magnet of hope. It's things are going to come to us. We're not going to go to them. And that's generally a critical path is failure points for these people.
And it's something that we saw on the battlefield a lot that allowed these men and women that are 19, 20, 21 years old to put themselves in situations that most people didn't think they were going to walk back from. was the idea that I've got these multiple objectives that I need to hit in the next hour or the next week or the next amount of time, whatever that is. And I see so many salespeople going the opposite path where they think, if I don't generate a sale on this call, even though this person's at the top of my pipeline, I don't know much about them. They definitely don't know anything about me. I need to figure out a way to generate a sale or even a face-to-face meeting or a Zoom call meeting on this call, this next call. And if that doesn't happen, then I'm not successful. And that's one of the reasons that I see so much call reluctance crop up, because 9 times out of 10, unless you've got a hell of a value proposition or you have a really well-crafted target prospect list, you're not going to generate that winning result every single call. But it doesn't mean that we can't be successful along the way. And I know this is something that ConnectAndSell helps people achieve, right? If I can't get you into a meeting, what can I learn from you that still gets you deeper into my pipeline? Even if it's just to qualify you. Are you the decision maker? If that's all I learn on a call, I know that call is a success. So I'd love to hear from you a little bit about where you see salespeople kind of not relying on discipline at all, because it does take discipline to pick up the phone to achieve even a small objective. Where do you see them kind of shoot for the moon, and then when they don't hit that, they just say, well, screw it. I guess I'm just not any good at calling right now. I'm going to go mess around on LinkedIn or any other aspect of sales that doesn't get you the results as fast.
Yeah, I think there's three pillars that are driving it, right? There's sort of popular culture, what people believe a salesperson is before they even enter the industry, right? So what do they think? They think Jordan Belfort. They think Vin Diesel in Boiler Room. They think, and they think it's just smooth one-off. Look at me, my ego, my character. I made that happen. But what they never seem to realize is that they're just a jigsaw piece in the composition of a wider strategy. They just need to be told to execute well, and generally they're not, which leads on to my next point. That battlefield analogy is quite interesting, right? Most of the time people have got outstanding NCOs, they've got outstanding commissioned officers above them, they've got outstanding staff officers above them, right? The inculcation of the value set all the way down to the mission objectives, to the how do we execute the mission plan that's coming from the sergeant. They're all fundamentally wired, consistent, and structured the same way. You go into virtually any modern technology sales business right now, or any modern services business, it's completely the opposite. We've got the sales development reps writing the strategy and pushing it back up to the CEO. How can you expect them to be consistently good when their experiences aren't really driving to the objective? It's always got to be the CEO sending that message down to the organization and making sure it's consistent in order for an objective to be fully executed well. And the third thing is, I'm going to show you my iPhone, right? The phone component of my own phone is like the 7th most popular app on the iPhone, right? The next 6 before it are either 3 social media platforms and the rest are messaging, right? So I've now got 20 to 25-year-olds coming into the workforce. They've never really used a phone in anger in their life. They'll do anything they can to hide from that conversation. That's not. It's not to say. It's not to say that they. It's not right or wrong. By the way, I'm not myopic. I just think nobody's there sitting with these people, telling them about how they can unlock brilliance in the form of system, executed against the context of an objective, which then drives to results which can be measured. And that's the last point is, we've got a world of commission press at the moment because we're incentivizing the wrong behaviors, especially at the top of the funnel. All right. I actually want to reward and incentivize people for getting referrals. I want to find and reward and incentivize people for qualifying out early. I want to find and incentivize conversations that actually push people into nurture and marketing, so that the medium term part of my market can start to have that awareness being built. So if we re-engage with people on what the outcomes need to look like, meetings are great, but only 3% of the market's in market right now. If I'm getting meetings with those people, it's too late. If I'm getting meetings with the next lot down, it's too early. But summarily, I'm getting information. And so what do we have to do? Well, we have to teach people to be objective-based. Objective-based is just helping people define curiosity around your problem set that you solve for, and then use all of the outcomes in order to reposition how you execute into your marketing and into your sales delivery funnel.
So I think that's something that would be really useful for salespeople to do this. Then let's talk about micro objectives and build a system out of it. because I know this is something that Connect and Sell helps organizations do. So we can kind of tap into your brilliance to make this happen. But when we talk about building systems, same way we did on the battlefield, I need this thing to be ready to pull off a shelf so that I don't have to try to reinvent the wheel every single sales call, every single sales meeting. And the system that we're going to build, I have a feeling, is going to be able to apply to both an outbound call or a sit-down meeting, a product demo, anything like that, because micro objectives flow through each of them. And so when we think about systems in the military, a lot of acronyms floating around there. I know you're aware of this as well. So we use this acronym TRIM because we're trimming hope away from a sales strategy. Every single sales system that we have removes more hope. So the acronym TRIM, the T in TRIM, the thing to kick it off is the trigger element. When should I be setting my call micro objectives or my meeting micro objectives? Is that before I meet with someone? Is it right before I step into the room? Is it as I'm getting my prospect list together? Do I need to define what I need to know about these people to sell to them? How do I trigger a list or a system that gets me the list of things I need to find out from my prospects? What point in the sales cycle do I pull this off the shelf?
I think it cuts across all multi-stage sales processes. Like every component of a sales process still requires some of the key inputs. I see sort of a sales process as almost like drilling a hole to explore for oil, right? There's that initial sort of 3 or 4 feet below the surface to find out viability, right? Then there's that initial push down to the next bit. Then there's an initial push. What's happening is that the pressure gets bigger and bigger and bigger, but the rewards and the information get better and better and better each time you go deep. Now, I can't expect to get all of that information that I need in order to execute really well ahead of my very first engagement. Imagine I'm cold calling Sean. I don't know everything about Sean, but I've got a hypothesis. The hypothesis informs the talk track and it informs the list build. Sean's a CEO of a company that wants to speak to other people. Fine, that's enough, right? Then it's about building a message that makes Sean excited about the opportunity to have conversations with more people in his market. That's the execution. But Sean might not please me with the quality of the execution because I might not get the immediate first line objective that I want. Fine, move on to the secondary objective, the tertiary objective, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, because there are 6 or 7 tributaries of value that come out of just asking good questions of Sean as that first top line conversation develops. Now, one of those objectives that gets met might actually pivot back to the top objective, ask again. Right, but it might not.
Yeah, right.
That's okay. We can be equipped with further information so that when we push the drill harder at the right time, based on the information that Sean's given us, we then push on and execute into the next phase. Right, and that's the point. I think people just see often that their ego gets in the way and they just want to do this. It's almost what I would call like the Arnold Schwarzenegger Predator military allegory, right? He just wants to go in and shoot some stuff. Very little thought, just one man going in, army of one, right? It's not like an appropriate concept. So going back to the system, well, you need teams, right? You need teams of people that are list experts. You need teams of people that are messaging experts. You need teams of people that can deploy because their voice and curiosity and ability to actually deliver the call is superior. One of the issues that we've got at the moment is we're trying to sort of compound all these different levels of expertise into one seller and expect them to be equipped and equitably good at all of the things that are in their job. And that's not fair on them. We're doing it because we're trying to compress costs, but at the same time, we're actually making everything more expensive because we're trying to jam 4 jobs into a labor cost, which is only about $500 a day. Yeah. Give me that $500, give that person conversations and allow them to have 50 conversations. That person becomes cheap by every measure. But at the same time, that person shouldn't be building their list. That's the role of a mission specialist, a list builder, right? So you have to be very, very thoughtful about how you set up your system. In the army, it's all about resource, right? Right resource applied to the right problem at the right time. And that's why your battalion or your platoon or the people that go out and execute that have all got specialist roles delivering on specialist scope. But they might have some additional slices of training, right?
Yes, and that's the next piece we're going to jump into now. So I've got the trigger element, which sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong here, it's anywhere across the sales cycle where you recognize I need to know a certain amount of things.
Yeah.
And so in my mind, thinking about setting this up, if I'm in an organization, like you said, one of the probably 99% out there that doesn't have this already, I need to sit down as soon as humanly possible and identify what are the things I need to know about my prospect to drive that sale forward. And if I know all 8 things or all 18 things or however many you come up with, then that's almost a sale right there. If I know 18 things about this prospect and they're all the right things, I know more than any of my competitors. I know when their buying window is. I know who the decision makers are.
Yeah.
I know what their challenges are. I know I know everything I could possibly know. So if I screw this up, it's because of me, not because of them at that point. So that's a trigger element to identify that. Now, if I want to make this repeatable, how do I actually identify what those 6, 8, 18, 80 things are? Because I could sit down and really map out my ideal prospect profile, but do I really need to know all those things? So how do I differentiate the things that drive my sale forward as opposed to the 100 other things that probably don't?
Yeah, I think it's easy to get distracted though, right? Because we can broaden the ICP, we can talk about areas of value that value streams that aren't interesting. Like there's top value, bottom value, there's middle value. Focus on top value, all right? Focus on the execution layer there. Whilst you might need a detailed plan, the detailed plan only needs to be executed when the initial plan doesn't work, right? So I think that's the other thing that worries me sometimes is that the people in the world today seem to jump to complexity. Right, they want to do the most complex thing, which is to make it really deep and really broad. And that then means that you never actually align to the ask. The ask is always commercial, right? Well, is there any reason why we can't move ahead? Is there any reason why we can't do this? Is there any reason why we shouldn't do this? If you're confident that you've met 8 out of 12 criteria, always be looking to execute the mission, which is close the deal and sell the deal, right? You just need a minimum bar. You just need a minimum bar. And that's the thing, I think, I can talk with this with a relative degree of strength, I think, Sean, because my father was an infantry officer, right? So he often talks about military planning in the British Army, and, perfection was often the enemy of action. So if we're constantly looking for perfection to execute, we never will. But 8 out of 10 is good enough, 8 out of 12 is good enough, just to get going, just to keep the momentum going. And then you can find out a huge amount of the fact discovery afterwards. It's just simple science. And nobody's ever going to get 12 out of 12 in anything, because why? There's another human in the process. Best you can do sometimes is X. I mean, look at, SEAL Team 6, what they did when they executed that mission with Barack Obama. It was imperfect. But they still finished it because they had enough contingency, enough training, and enough skill to finish and complete the mission, even though it went off the rails, right?
And that seems like one of the elements of making this thing repeatable, which is the R in trim that we haven't actually addressed on the show, which is if I have 8 out of 12, what do I do about the missing 4? Do I bypass them, or do I have a contingency plan in case I don't have the answers to those questions? And that's something if you have any ideas about that, I'd love for you to speak to it.
It's a scoring criteria. It's a scoring criteria to determine what of the 12 pieces of information are the most essential. And you're always sort of pursuing that, right? So last team that I ran at any sort of consequence, we worked in quite a complex environment. I managed to install MedPick as our sort of framework to operate in order to give me confidence that the deal was MedPick qualified to the level I needed it to. I gave a scoring criteria to every component of MedPick, right? So if I got 0 out of 2 for M, don't even come and talk to me about it being forecastable yet. I need at least 1 across all of it, so I can score the entire thing at 7 out of 14. Then I'll start listening to you about the deal quality. When it starts going up from 7, when it starts getting into 10, 11, I'm going to start treating it seriously. I'm going to start looking into the deal. I'm just going to start investigating the deal. I'm going to start, because one of the things that's also missing in sort of, to use your book, bulletproofing sales processes, is this idea that it's a purely qualitative overlay. It's not, it's quantitative. So you can start deploying scorings and mechanisms to really get people up to grade. I think that's useful as well. But it's then determining which of the 12 criteria you care about the most. Is it a blend of 6? Is it 5 are essential? Is it 1? And every go-to-market is going to be different based on their requirements and their needs. I only need 2
so
questions.
We've got the trigger element, making it repeatable.
Yeah.
And so I'm interested in the I in this, which is making this thing improvable. That's the I in trim. So I've got my trigger element. I'm making it repeatable. I'm using the same consistent steps to figure out what do I need to know? What are the bare minimum things I need to know? What do I do if I don't know those other things? Do I just cast them aside, or do I have to figure out another way to get around it to keep the deal moving forward? Scoring things, I love that. A lot of great organizations that I work with are doing that very thing. But if I want to take a look at this quarterly, let's say, and ask, how can I improve it? what are the elements that I'm looking at, or how am I improving this? Because you probably had to walk teams through this in the past to be able to say,
Yeah.
am I asking the right questions? Do I need to add questions? Are we getting feedback on the tail end from our customers that says we need to know something that we're neglecting to ask on the leading indicator end, on the front end of this conversation? How would I look to improve this system?
I mean, call recordings are the obvious thing that you can turn to. I can go and listen to hundreds of top of funnel calls to find out if it's a messaging execution issue. We call it drift. All right, and there are things you can drift from easily because the human dynamic is such that people get bored and try to become creative with all the components of delivery in a selling process. So if you're monitoring for drift, then you can sort of quickly calibrate. It doesn't need to be quarterly, it can be weekly, especially at top of funnel. I listen to all my reps' calls. Right, I listen to my sales guys' calls in terms of discovery and proof of value and closing, but I also listen to my top of funnel reps in terms of their execution on cold calling in particular and follow-ups. Now, we've got a 4-part process, right? Every single one of those conversations is a 4-part process. And I'm listening for 4 things. I'm listening for intent. I'm listening for curiosity. I'm listening for delivery of breakthrough. And then I'm listening for ask for something. Same in our discovery process. Yeah. There, I'm adding a different layer. I'm listening for transitions, right? The transitions and flips between topics. They're all measurable. They're measurable in terms of consistent talk time. They're measurable in terms of number of questions and type of questions. So I can see all of that information. I think the other thing is just listening to your troops. They're going to tell you stuff pretty quickly if you've set them up the right way. And then keeping your experiments scientific. Right. One of the reasons why a lot of top of funnel go to market fails is because we start to fuse different job titles into lists. We start to fuse different categories of company into lists. We start to fuse different categories of funding into lists. Heck, we're even doing some work at the moment reviewing psychographic segmentation, where we can look at personality types at scale and see whether or not we can develop messages around that. So every single message, pillar, list, and structure has the opportunity to be high on execution without the rep having to do a huge amount of research, provided that they've been taught what the right words to say are. The research can happen in and of the conversation that you're having with the prospect. Now, the way that I think about this, Sean, is that I think about everything in the context of data. Now, I can Google you, right? I can find hundreds of pages on Google on you, but so can everybody else in the world. There's nothing really unique in me knowing a huge amount about stuff that's publicly available. I can then buy information about you, which is all right. I'm separating myself out from at least 70% of the people that might want to vent to you. But at the same time, I'm still in 30%, and private information is always curated from other places and just given a nice little analyst wrapper, right? Now, what is unique, what is proprietary, what's confidential, private, and completely proprietary is the right word to use here, is the unique conversation that just you and me have, that nobody else is privy to. It's situational. It takes into account emotion. It takes into account value drivers that change on a daily basis, dependent on emotional state. You and I could have a very similar conversation tomorrow, but my 2-year-old son might have thrown my iPad out of the bathroom window tonight, and I'll be in a highly different mood to the mood I'm in today. So you might not get as much of me as you're getting, or I might not get as much of you. So that's the beauty of upskilling your objective-based sellers, is they've got the playbook, they're executing well. They're now going to give me information about the variance, what's happening inside that variable private conversation that you can't see anywhere else. And that's
something that I've coached so many salespeople on. I'm sure you have as well, folks that use the phone as a last resort rather than as a first resort. And I always ask them, in your industry, it's not the same in every industry, Gerry, but in most industries, a phone call is required to close a large deal. And you talk about more than a couple of grand, somebody's getting on the phone with somebody in most cases. And so I say, why would you go through email and LinkedIn and text message and every other form of communication for 6 months just to drive a phone call when you could pick up the phone in the beginning? So I love the idea of actually looking at, let's look at some areas of the conversations that we can begin improving based on that feedback. Now, the final part of this, the M in trim, is measuring. Because if I'm taking the time to develop these points, these 6, 8, 18, 80 points that I need to know about my prospect, defining which ones are absolutely required, scoring them, putting a scoring system behind them, and then taking the time to actually score them from myself, from my sales reps, that's time away that I could be banging the phone, could be selling. even if worse than I'm selling now, but I could be selling. So what am I measuring to make sure this system is worth continuing? And of course, driven deals through the pipeline is an easy one. Am I selling more? But I'll bet you have some ideas for what I should be measuring on the leading side of this equation.
Yeah, leading side, regardless of channel, it's pretty simple. It's meetings per rep hour. So in per hour of rep time invested, how many meetings are we getting? It's quite hard to sort of imagine what that future is without some degree of automation, but it obviously establishes some of the business case for it. We're looking at other efficiency measures like rep productivity per hour as well, alongside meetings per rep hour, because you can have somebody that does a lot. They can do 10 units of something, but only get X percentage of conversion in the equivalent amount of time to somebody who does 1 unit of something and gets 1 as an outcome. So there's a nice little differential equation there between those two assets that looks at conversion as the primary sort of value driver for all top of funnel work. Then we've got efficiency measures. You know, how many conversations does it take me to connect to a prospect? How many of those conversations can I set to a meeting? How many dials does it take me to get to the meeting? So you're compounding around those critical time and labor components. The conversion component's always a function of quality, but it's also a function of, and this is where a lot of people don't really think about it particularly deeply. In my mind, it's message market fit, right? If I'm converting at sub 5% on the cold call, I've probably either got a weak rep, a weak message, or I've got a terrible proposition in the context of my market, or I'm in an oversaturated market. If I'm converting from 3 to 5%, I'm probably doing okay, but I could do better possibly. If I'm 5 to 10%, I've probably actually got a good combination of good rep, good message, good market. If I'm converting at plus 10%, I've probably got great market, great list, right? So you can get all of this telemetry just off a conversion number, and it applies to all channels. And then I'm also looking at sort of cost per response. You know, if I'm using multi-threading and multi-channel kind of tools like outreach, what's my rep labor times divided by the cost to get to a response? It doesn't need to be a meeting. And then I'm looking at what it takes me to get a meeting. It's probably about 1% of all activity over a sales engagement platform. Then, this is the critical one because everything anchors off this: meeting sit rate. Meeting sit rate. I can set a bucket load of meetings, but if I only got 30% of the people I sit with turning up, what am I doing in my post-conversation to sit rate process to either drive the meeting rate, or am I just sort of taking the first meeting and not really doing any qualification? What's going on there for me to understand that? So the better the quality of my sit rate, generally the better my opportunity creation is, because if I can take sort of 70% sit rate, 50 to 60% sales qualified lead, now I'm in the dynamics of actually mapping what my critical path of deals looks like. So
I love it. And of course, the people showing up to the meeting are the ones that they've been sold enough down the way to give you more of their time. And that means when you qualify them, and this really feeds back to the beginning, doesn't it? Where if I'm asking great qualifying questions because I need to know the 8 things, and they're showing up to the meeting, those are great qualifying questions. They're like, oh, this guy knows what he's talking about. He understands enough about my business model. That's awesome that you would measure that.
Yeah, and also I think the other thing that you've got to do is just go in with the hypothesis for that meeting. It might be different to the other meeting, right? Like, why now? Why you? Why us? Right? So as market forces, it's easy to go out and buy like an email tool, but it's not easy to go and buy a dialing platform or a weapon like ours. So you need to show somebody something that they've never thought about before. You definitely don't want to make it an interrogation. So the stylistics of how you execute are as important as the way you model in your critical questions and critical requirements for information, because that's ultimately a key differentiator in a highly competitive world or a competitive category. Stylistically, what am I doing differently so that my experience for my prospect is professional, world-class, fun, engaging, and thoughtful? Those are really hard to measure, but generally it's wow. We call them wow moments. How many wow moments do we get? How many oh my god moments? What can we share out of our chorus instance or our refract instance that allows us to sort of swagger in front of our colleagues and go, yeah, do you see what the CRO over at XYZ company said today? And send that 30-second clip and you've got the wow moment, right? So that's the flair, that's the human to human component coming to life. But you can actually coach for it, right? You can coach for it. You know, I follow a lot of, interestingly, even though I'm out in the UK, I follow a lot of like high school American basketball, and watching the sort of transitions and the way that the NBA scouts are profiling and selecting kids. You go down that rabbit hole, you end up in a world of like YouTube videos of them with one-to-one trainers. They've got one-to-one trainers on specific like footwork moves and stuff now. So anybody looks at that and says, right, it's impromptu or it's just reactive, it's talent. It's not. They've been given scenarios, they've been given thoughtful scenarios and skills to jab step onto somebody's left foot or to drive past them if they show their right foot, right? That's exactly the same with good sellers. But for the prospect, they don't see that work. They just see it as this amazing flair moment that kind of goes, okay, yeah, that makes all the sense in the world. Where do I sign, right? So.
Well, Gerry, that'll have to be the next conversation that you and I have, because I want to make sure that people have the opportunity to go out there, build their call objectives, and begin to use them. But yeah, absolutely, you can take anything that we've talked about and figure out how do we train for this. So we'll have to have you back on the show to talk about the best ways that you've seen salespeople do that. So, Gerry, I know you're active on LinkedIn because we connected there. How do we find out more about you, about the world you're in, about Connect and Sell? Are you just in the UK? Are you handling organizations from anywhere else in the world? Tell us how we can get deeper into Gerry Hill's world.
Yeah, I mean, obviously LinkedIn. Anybody ever wants to phone me, they can. I'm probably one of the only people in the world that ever puts my phone number up in these things. So it's +44 for the UK, 7702034081. Listen back to that and give me a call. I will typically answer the phone 98% of the time to most people at most times. LinkedIn, I think, Connect and Sell's on the European mission right now. We've seen a lot of soft demand in the market. We're acquiring customers. We've got in terms of the category, superior proposition, because we're the only people that can actually service obscure phone numbers in places like Germany, France, and other places. So we definitely want to double down on that over the next 2 years. Hiring some customer success people, which is a revenue strategy role. So if anybody in the European region who might be listening to this is interested, we're looking for somebody right now. And, it's just an interesting organization. It's thoughtful technology, and, anybody who wants to learn about how they can have sort of almost anywhere between 6 to 20 times more conversations per rep per day, I'm always available to talk about.
And that's why we love having Connect and Sell folks on, because that's a need in the market, especially ways for our salespeople to spend more time in front of qualified prospects. So, Gerry, thanks so much for sharing with us on Bulletproof Selling. For all of you listeners out there, for all the viewers, make sure you're following us here on LinkedIn and YouTube for all these live streams. I mentioned in the beginning of the show the archive that we have available. Well, you can definitely check that out on Podcast World. So if you're on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, anywhere the podcast can be found, every one of our episodes is archived there. If you're into these live streams like Gerry and I are recording on right now, you want to see the video version of this, every single one of those is on our YouTube channel at Bulletproof Selling. And of course, for more sales systems to help you replace hope with certainty, just like the one that you heard Gerry and I build today, make sure you're checking those out over at bulletproofselling.us. Sean Rhodes here. It's been a pleasure serving the sales community alongside you, Gerry. Let's get out there and make selling bulletproof.
Absolutely. Excellent.